It's time for the Voice of Reason podcast. Here are your hosts, Sean Phillips, Andy Van Beber, and Travis Kirkendall.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 4 of season 4 of the Voice of Reason podcast. Do not adjust your dial. Do not adjust your picture. Sean did not turn effeminate on us. This is our special guest tonight, Sara Rutherford. So, Sara is I'm going to let her give a little bit of an introduction. First of all, Sara, welcome to the Voice of Reason. We are glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been a fan and a listener for quite some time, so it's interesting to be on this side.
Yes, and when I called Sara the other day, she's like, "I've never been on a podcast." But it's like, okay, this isn't Joe Rogan, okay? Millions of people tuning in, but we do have a good fan base, and we have a lot of people near and far who listen, and but we're so glad to have Sara on. Sean is gone for a month, National Guard training out in California. He left yesterday morning, informed me that he got there safely, and is deep in the muck and mire of training and all this other good stuff. So, just got married, bought a new house, and then go to California. So that's good stuff right there. So, without further ado, Sara, tell us a little bit about yourself. I'll just say you're a former student of mine graduated 7 years ago?
However long ago 2017 was. So,
7 years ago. Okay.
7 years ago? Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, you graduated 7 years ago. Tell us a little bit about what you've done since your days leaving high school and everything, and where you're at now and everything.
Yeah, sure. So, hi again, I'm Sara. V gave it away that I am a former Clopton student, class of 2017. After leaving Clopton, I went to SLU and I got my undergraduate in business. And then from there, right away, I went into law school where I earned a dual degree MBA and a JD. So I just graduated with the JD this past May. I just took the bar, 3 weeks ago, the July Missouri bar exam. So, cross all your fingers and toes that there's good results in September. But I really do
Sorry, I had to throw that in.
That's okay. Thank you. Oh my gosh. But I really do credit my initial idea in getting into the world of law, both to, my dad, Alex, who's an attorney, but then also youth and government, or I think now it's youth and government. YAG.
Youth and government. Yes.
Now it's YAG. I knew it is YAG,
right.
but absolutely had a blast there and thought maybe I should look at this as a career choice. And all these years later, here we are. So I'm in too deep now to back out.
Yes. And part of the reason why, just to give an explanation to our listeners and viewers tonight, one of the reasons, and I thought, what better way than to, we're coming into election season, and we're having a series this week and next week. We're calling it the last 4 years, and we're taking it from both sides. So Sara actually represents, I told her this the other day and called her. I said, when I think of the left, I think of Sara because of her political journey, which she'll share with us here in a second. Our planned guest, I'm not making a ton of promises, but is Representative Chad Perkins, who will represent the right next week on next week's show. So, Sara, give us a little bit about coming from the heart of red country, Pike County, Missouri, and I'm assuming, I don't know what your parents, I know what your mother's is, but so
yeah.
Kind of explain a little bit how you've gotten to where you're at now.
Right. So that is a super interesting journey, but let me preface with anything that I say, is not legal advice, anything like that. I'm not barred. I'm not an expert by any means in any field. So everything that I'm saying is just my opinion off the cuff, just on, things I've studied and seen. But so my political journey, I remember I was freshly 18 when the 2016 election happened, and I literally just voted exactly how my parents told me to. They told me down to, prop whatever, vote this way on it, vote this way for this person, for judge, for this, for that. And I'm freshly 18. I'm more concerned about, am I taking enough dual credit classes? When am I going to wear to prom? Where am I going to college? That I didn't really worry about, doing my own kind of research. And I thought, like, let me trust my parents. So they are definitely more conservative leaning. It goes all the way back to like my grandparents vote that way, my parents vote that way, again, in the heart of red country. So, that's just, it comes with the territory. So after that, I went to college and I, witnessed the first Donald Trump presidency as everyone else did. And I really expanded my horizons. I started making friends with people who were not from rural Missouri, who were not from rural areas anywhere else, really. People from big cities, people from foreign countries, people who were undocumented, and seeing how a lot of those policies that I voted for without doing my own research, like actively impacted them and made their life scarier or more difficult or adversely impacted them. And then I thought, oh wow, this is like a serious thing. Maybe I should look into this more. And I'm not going to be the person to come on here and tell you if you go to college you're going to get liberalized and all this scary stuff, because that's what I was told. But I mean, I think it is very, very important for the average person to get out of your comfort zone. If you do choose to move away, whether that's for a job or for training or for college, then you should definitely look into what you're voting for and not just trust your folks entirely. So then I definitely moved a little bit more towards the center and then a little bit more towards the left. I would not say that I am completely all the way down on the left side of the political spectrum. I think extremism on any side is a little bit dangerous.
Right.
So I try to, deal with that in moderation. But regardless of your party or what branch you are in government, what level, federal, state, local, doesn't matter. I think it's always a great idea to have a healthy dose of skepticism concerning anyone in authority. So take that as you will, but I do have some hot takes on even the people that I did vote for or plan on voting for. So,
and we will get to that here in a little bit. One of the things that that we emphasize, and this has been one of the goals of the Voice of Reason, and Sean says it just about once a month, is do your research. Do your research. Don't blindly follow. And the way you put it there, as an 18-year-old, fresh, a lot of teenagers in their first time in the voting booth is that it is, okay, mom and dad, what should I do? Even though I try to emphasize kids, hey, get out there and don't just go with what why do you vote the way you vote? So that is a great point. So let's just start. I've got actually if you see this, I actually type wrote questions and then I took notes, and so
oh my goodness.
For those who are regular listeners of the program know that I don't normally do this, but I actually, so just to prepare, and I can prove to Sean later on, prep notes for the show tonight. I haven't done prep notes for season. I don't think I've done prep notes since season 1. So
oh wow.
Wait a minute, I think I deserve some of this. So, okay.
Yes.
So anyway, so let's talk about them. Tell me, and we'll talk about specific issues, but overall, how have you felt about these economic policies that have been implemented the last 4 years? So, like we're talking about, different economic policies that the Biden administration, the hot one is the American Rescue Plan. Okay. And as of here recently, the Inflation Reduction Act. Just overall, I mean, what, and I'll just preface it with this because I'm also going to play devil's advocate throughout the night. And Sarah knows this. A lot of people know that I am pretty much a moderate. People call me wishy-washy, whatever you want to call me. I'm middle of the road. But just to play loyal, to give background to some of our listeners, the American Rescue Plan was implemented in 2022, I believe, at a initial cost of $1.9 trillion. And through this, Biden has claimed historic drops in, and he did this actually in his last State of the Union address. He declared historic drops in Black and Hispanic unemployment, keeping foreclosures and mortgage rates to 20% below, and expanding Medicaid to everybody. So what is your thought? I mean, how do you look at this? How do you view this? What are your thoughts on this, on the economic policies?
Just in general, or
Yeah.
like specific to
Anyway,
just in
any
general?
way you want to go. Any way you want to go.
Okay, sure. So let me preface with some of these areas I'm absolutely more attuned to and are, prepared to talk about. So I may get to a topic and honestly not have a complete answer for you. So if that's just how it goes, just a heads up. But when it comes to the big umbrella that is economic policy, I have found that a lot of people, anytime that a new economic policy is rolled out, everyone is suddenly an economist and everyone is suddenly an expert. But then you really start asking people,
when
what's
you know about it, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, but then, well, hell, I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but I have 2 degrees in business, and so I like to think that I know maybe a little bit. Thank God, I at least know what inflation is, which not a lot of people actually know what it is, or even the difference between monetary and fiscal policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's kind of the groundwork to understand. But I mean, with any economic policy, you have to look at the whole picture. So both macroeconomic, but then also how outside factors. So I mean, like the war in Ukraine or COVID, because that was kind of an outside factor.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just isolated within the US. And you have to take into account how your economic policy is going to affect and be affected by your internal events and your external events, excuse me. So when it comes to the American Rescue Plan, everything that I have seen in doing my own research and looking at specifically the Department of Labor or Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Federal Reserve has a massive database of all kinds of data going back, I want to say maybe to like the 40s. Yeah, Fred is an awesome website.
Yes,
if you go back and look at that, it's maybe a hot take, but a lot of studies have been done analyzing that data, showing that the economy has statistically, for the most part, performed a little bit better under a Democratic administration, specifically for just like the presidency. I'm not sure if there are any studies that look at, are all 3 chambers of the government blue, are they red, things like that.
Right.
But so I will say this honestly goes to a microeconomic level as well. So if you look at a firm versus like the government, a lot of them operate on the same principles, but it's just the firm or like an industry is like a mini version of it. So a big theory that's been out there right now is stakeholder theory or stakeholder accountability. So you're not worried about just profits. I mean, we're in a capitalistic society, but you're also worried about, are your workers safe? Are they being paid well? Are they being cared for? Is the environment being accounted for? This list can go on and on and on. So we've seen in a lot of fiscal policy or in a lot of economic policies that if a firm is operating and considering all of those factors rather than just value to the shareholders, the firm performs substantially better over time. So if you take that theory and you apply it to an economic policy, the economy, put an asterisk next to that, is going to perform better because we can't really say, no one was predicting a global pandemic. So that had all of its own implications that a lot of people can't factor into, any kind of policy.
So when you
but
take,
if you account,
when you take,
yeah,
I just want to interject something here real quick, again, as devil's advocate here. So what explanation do you give then to people who say, okay, it should be, to quote Woodrow Wilson, the business of America is business. Okay, and of course, strangely enough, he was a Democrat, but now within that's pretty much, that is now, I think the Republican mantra is what drives the economy, and that's where the question comes. Whereas Democrats feel like you explained it perfectly there. Okay, if you take care of the base takes care of you. Whereas, I mean, how do you respond to Republicans who say, okay, basic trickle down economics, we're going to give some, we're going to give we're going to give, and this has been, and this is the, and I know this is what Chad's going to talk about next week, but this is going to be, if you give more up at the top, it'll, you know, to quote Reagan, it'll eventually trickle down the bottom. We've seen in the past, though, and I know you're going to address this when I give you the second here, but the question is, does it trickle down? Does it? And so, how do you? I mean, the Republicans' response has been, and Trump has already said that he wants to. Right, he reduced. I think we talked about last week. He reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%, and based upon his current policy platform, he's talking about reducing that tax down to 15%. So, your thoughts there?
So I love when we talk about Trump tax policy just because it's something that we've looked at a lot. So if you remember, under the Trump administration, he enacted the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, and I believe 2017. And that was basically Reaganomics just packaged up in like a new wrapping paper.
Yes, it was.
So,
yes, it was.
And again, he's counting on, we're going to slash the tax rate for giant corporations, and we'll hope that that trickles down in the form of new investment, of creating new jobs. We hope that corporations will take that tax cut, all that leftover money, and invest it into new projects, new departments, new this, new that, whatever, or trickle it down to their existing employees. That did not happen. They literally passed it off as dividends to their shareholders. That is like a huge thing that we have talked about in one of my final classes in law school, is how it's marketed as, this looks so good, like it can't fail. It failed. And Trump's never going to tell you that it didn't fail. Like, he's going to say, no, it was great and everything worked out. It literally didn't. We never saw that trickle down. And I mean, granted, I've only been alive for 26 years. So I haven't seen Reaganomics really in practice under that administration. So exactly. So V, chime in, please. I was not even a thought when all that was going on. But I'm saying right now, it's not trickling down. It didn't trickle down, but he's going to take all the credit by saying that it trickled down. And people will believe him. I hate to say it.
And see, and a lot of that comes from, you know, and you have to take into consideration, and we brought up, Sean and I brought up this point before, that when you look at a presidency, you can't look at just the single body of the presidency. You have to look at the after effects of the previous presidency. Okay, you have to look at what was implemented that, you know, I mean, when Barack Obama came in, he was coming in after a series, I mean, Bush's war on terrorism. He was one of the highest defense spending allocations that we saw since the Cold War. Okay, fighting in Afghanistan and Iran, or in Iraq, and, you know, and then trickling over into Syria and Lebanon and everything else. Then that's passed on. That, with everything else, you know, the dot-com boom would lead to the recession. And so Obama, and so then Trump has his fuel for the fire and say, oh, look what they did. Okay, now everybody is saying, oh, look at our economy now under Biden, but you still have to take in the previous body of work that was before him. And so Reaganomics, when Reagan came in, Reagan was coming off, I mean, Jimmy Carter, talking about screwing the pooch, Jimmy Carter screwed the pooch in a royal way. Reagan had a lot to deal with, but his idea was, it was very, like you said, it's very trusting. When you say you're going to put money in at the top, you're the full faith that you're not going, that the benefactors, and again, this is my take. I don't believe in top down. I really don't believe in bottom up either. I don't believe in putting it straight at the base, but at the same time, you've got to find a happy medium somewhere. But yeah, Reaganomics, trickle down economics is just who you talk to as to how they think it works. So with that in mind, then we get more into the ARP, and you can, and I'm sure you'll type. So according to who was it? The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. This is a nonpartisan commission. This is another one of my little favorite little data pools and Pew Research and all those guys. I love those guys. But so comparing national debt, increasing the national debt under Trump, now excluding COVID, excluding all and like you said, COVID was a major external factor. Trump added $4.8 trillion without COVID, and with COVID, he increased the national debt by $8.4 trillion. Okay. Biden, without or with the American with the American Relief Plan, it was 4.3 with and 2.2 without. So tie that in. I mean, what is that? What is as you as a person on the left? What does that say to you, or the effectiveness, or however you want to look at that? How do you see that as far as, you know, did Biden do more with less, or was he trying to overcompensate, or how do you see that?
I mean, so it's an interesting take just because it's so hard to try to remove every COVID factor from the analysis, which, I mean, you know, that's everyone was living in it. So it's really, really difficult to do that. I think, as you said before, you put it very nicely, how, you know, you kind of inherit the economy of the previous administration. So that being said, regardless of who is currently in power, regardless of whomever's economy you're inheriting, I think that we should be mindful of any of the benefits that they're inheriting that they didn't exactly cause, or all the problems that they're inheriting too. So to be fair, I don't think we should credit Biden with inheriting such a low inflation rate when Trump's term expired. And I also don't think that, so again, I don't think that like you can compensate the benefits that was kind of previously done by the immediately preceding administration, and you can't bring in, you know, any of the problems either. So you can't, you know, fault someone who wasn't even in power when that problem manifested. Regardless, I think it's really tough. I do think it's really tough. Especially now, I'm also thinking about the Biden administration just with current spending because of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And that's going to be, I'm sure you'll ask about it. That's a huge touch point on where spending is going, and where a lot of people, myself included, don't agree with it. Just because, you know, that's more of a moral issue, but regardless, that is factoring into how much you're spending. But if we're talking about economically, regardless, once you have the congressional credit card, if you want to say it that way, once you have the US credit card, you can just spend money left and right. And of course, everybody's going to say that you're not spending it correctly. But again, I think it's so hard to kind of remove the COVID factors and any other factors from that. So I know that's not a very concrete answer, but I promise I gave you a heads up that I may not have a concrete answer of everything.
Sorry. Yes, that's not a studio audience member, but it is. It's my dog.
Well, someone's stomping up and down the stairs at my house, so they're not a studio audience member either. But
there you go. So let's go. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but since you mentioned COVID, so we literally changed horses in midstream there. In the middle of COVID, well, what was it, year 3 of Trump's administration, and into, 2022, the beginning of 2022. So the two compared together, and I'm going to ask you this first as a student who was in university at the time, and then go from there. What was your opinion on the handling of the pandemic by current administration versus past administration? How did you I mean, what you witnessed and what you felt, how did you feel that the both performed under that?
So this might be a dumb question. When you say administration, do you want me to compare like university administration or like presidential administration?
Trump or Biden, and I mean, and then you can use that to go into what you saw in the local level as well.
Sure. Okay. So that's kind of a thorn in my side that I still have with the Trump administration, on top of like the multitude of other things that I disagree with. we saw hundreds of thousands of people die. And I mean, you see like what the rest of the world is doing. You saw that Italy was in lockdown. Italy and France, I believe, were in lockdown respectively in like March and April of 2020, completely shut down. And they were able to get their levels under control much faster than the US. But you also have to account for the fact that the US simply has more people, there's more space, things like that. But I think being proactive was the key. And we sort of missed the boat. And that ultimately cost us in the most morbid way. So being a student in university at that time, it was kind of scary just because there were, I mean, it's such an inherent thing of the American people to be like, no one's going to tell me what to do because it's like freedom, freedom, freedom. And that's just like in your DNA as an American. And if the government tries to tell you to do any one thing or to not do one thing, then everyone's kind of like, that's, we don't like being told what we can and can't do. And so that's when people kind of just disregarded any kind of COVID restrictions. And at that point, it was scary because maybe this is just on like a personal level, but I would see people out and about completely ignoring COVID restrictions at other universities across the country or other universities in the state. And I would see people just out and about completely disregarding it. They were going on with life like it was completely normal. And ultimately I was thinking, wow, I'm really not going to have a graduation this year. And so I really didn't have a graduation for my undergrad, but that was the thing that I was thinking at the time. I remember thinking it's because of like these people, it's because there's not any structure to any of these restrictions. No one's taking them seriously. We're putting them into effect way too late, which I know plenty of people who have lost grandparents or other loved ones that, I mean, I'm not in the field of health law or health policy, but I can tell you, I feel confident saying that if we had implemented restrictions earlier, like a lot of other countries with maybe less stubborn people, we probably could have saved more lives.
Yeah, and that that was, and that's going to, and again, I know that we'll hear this from the other side next week, and especially around this area, we took in that whole thing of, well, what 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 percentage of the United States is rural versus what percentage of the United States is urban, and that really didn't even come into the picture for me because not only did I get COVID once, I had COVID twice, and I was vaccinated. Okay. However, when I looked at the whole, I looked at it this way, and I told people this way: I'm not going to judge you either way. You get the vaccine, you do. You get the vaccine, you don't. You wear a mask. Okay, fine. You do your thing. But in my health, and I'm currently working on bettering my health. At the shape that I was in during COVID, I was told by my primary care physician and the people because I got okay, I can't even think if you get diagnosed with COVID within the first 24 hours, they give you the injection. What was it called? I can't think of it right now. But anyway, they said had I not had the vaccine, I probably would have been sucking on a ventilator tube. So that was
Oh my goodness.
because of and so. I agree with you. It is people who, the drive of, well, let me make my choice and I'll make my bed and live in it. When the government, I mean, so basically what you're saying is, the government's trying to be proactive and just say, we want to do what's best for our country. Is it going to infringe upon rights? Possibly. So yeah, that's a great point. One other issue I want to get to on domestic before we move on to the foreign scene, and this is going to hopefully be a little bit in your wheelhouse. And I picked this question, and I hope I don't overstep my bounds here. But so,
You're fine.
What's your opinion on how the Biden administration has addressed or tried to address racial and social injustice issues like police reform and criminal justice reform?
So that's interesting. Going into, I mean, the previous question kind of touched on it. And so I was kind of hoping that we would move more this way into like the constitutional law realm. I mean, so it's interesting because every administration I feel like every administration is going to at least try to address something like police brutality or gun violence or racial inequities, things like that. But it's the degree of which that administration is comfortable in addressing it. So, I mean, just historically, we've seen that more blue administrations are going to put it higher on their list of priorities, whereas red administrations, maybe it'll make the list, but it'll kind of just be like lower. But regardless, I think we have to put it into perspective that, and it's potential that Representative Perkins can touch on this a little bit more, just because I know he has a law enforcement background. I think that any presidential administration can do as much as they can, but their hands are kind of tied because that power is inherent to the states. That is the state's police power, quite literally police power. So it's in the name. And of course, there's other things that fall under police power. But since we're talking about that specifically, that really, really lies with the states. And it's so difficult for the federal government to overstep that boundary. Like they can only intermeddle with that so much.
Right.
Yeah, until the courts will be like, oh, you're like going a little bit too far, if that makes sense. So I think, I mean, I think there's work that absolutely needs to be done, but I'm not sure that anything at the federal level, within the executive branch is the means to get it done.
Well, and I think that
if that makes sense.
yes, and this is going to be one of, and since Joe stepped down and Kamala's running now, this has been probably, and she chose Tim Walz as her running mate. This is probably going to be her biggest on this issue because Trump's already mentioned it a gazillion times like he normally does, but he's going to go back to the George Floyd riots that occurred in Minneapolis and I mean, I have family that lives in St. Paul, and they were over an hour away,
Mm-hmm.
but they sheltered him. Of course, folks in Minnesota do it differently, but they sheltered in place. They didn't go out. They were afraid and all this stuff.
Right.
And there was so much critical, why did Tim Walz wait so long and all this stuff, and so the argument of the right is, okay, they'll say we believe in social justice, we believe in this stuff. Do you believe that there, and I'll ask you to respond to this, that in doing so and trying to fight social injustice, some people on the right have felt like, okay, we've went too much to the other way. Now we're seeing reverse, and I've heard this term, and you've probably heard this term a lot, reverse discrimination, and how we're favoring more, but yet we still see racial profiling, we still see unjust arrest, we see, I mean, do you think that the right has a ground to stand on to say that we've kind of tipped the scales the other way a little bit?
I mean, to generalize it is getting a little bit dangerous. If
Yes.
you're going to say there's reverse discrimination
Right.
there's reverse discrimination just generally. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's dangerous because are you talking about there's reverse discrimination in housing, in healthcare, in university admissions, in law enforcement? Like they're all there's other factors that go into it. So
Yep.
what I think is interesting is, and this is actually a bone that I kind of have to pick with Kamala Harris, is the fact that previously in her work when she was Attorney General of California, she famously came out and say that she's going to be California's top cop. And a lot of people really did not like that. And so that is something that has kind of haunted her, because when she initially announced her candidacy in the 2020 election, she, that kind of came back to bite her in the butt, I want to say it. But, her legacy was, among other things, but something that's standing out now is being the top cop and throwing a lot of people in jail based on like petty marijuana offenses. So there's that.
I was going to say she led the nation there during her tenure. She led the nation in marijuana convictions. So
right,
that was so interesting.
So I do think it's interesting that now, whether it's truly her, whether it's the party that's kind of pushing her to do so, we're kind of having to walk back that, just because when she was making those comments of being top cop and being like heavily enforcing, even just minor drug charges, now we kind of view that differently. Now we kind of view the police differently. And so now she's kind of walking back on that. And that is a major bone to pick that I have with
Yeah,
her. And I only mention that just because that is so tied to racial profiling, especially when she was doing things like that out in California back
yeah,
in
yep.
her days as the AG. But
That's a great point. That's a great point. Okay, so now we're here at the halfway point. We've talked a lot about domestic stuff. Now we're going to go shift the other direction. And you mentioned it, and so we're going to talk about some foreign policy. Let's start with, and it seemed like you were keyed up for this, administration's handling of what's going on between Israel and Hamas. What's your take on that?
my take on that. So well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that, this conflict has been going on for a very long time.
Over 2,000
And
years, but you know,
maybe, but it's been going on for a very long time. So I
Jews and
know some
Islams,
people are,
yeah, Jews and Muslims for yeah.
I was gonna say, but regardless, so I believe it was October 7th, 2023, when everything, yeah, I believe it was October when everything really escalated.
Right.
So I wasn't in the States. I was in Paris when that happened.
Really?
And
Okay.
so yeah, so seeing the response of that, in a European country was vastly different from what I expected or what my friends were telling me was going on here in the States. So, and I mean, I might step on some toes here. This is just my personal opinion.
It's business, the podcast. Go for it.
Perfect. Okay. I don't agree with it. I mean, personally, I think if you are siding with, the oppressor, what are you doing? I mean, that's just a personal opinion. I think these people have the Palestinian people have been persecuted enough. And I know so many people, I've heard it so many times, this argument where, oh, like the Holocaust, the Jews were so persecuted, which, yes, that's a very valid, like, stain on history. And I don't think we should overlook that at all. But I have Jewish friends that are even saying, like, what the hell is this? Like, that does not, just because my people, like, as a I'm not a Jewish person, but these are my Jewish friends saying this. They're saying, just as a Jewish person whose people went through the Holocaust, that doesn't automatically give you a green card to just be like, to just like bully other people. So, I mean, if my undergrad was in international business, so again, it's focusing more on business, but you also do have to address like the cultural and the background aspects of any country that you're looking at to expand into. So a little bit of foreign policy in there, but more capitalistic in nature.
Right.
If you looked at the history of this, like have you heard, like, all of these people that want to form opinions on the Israel-Palestine conflict don't have a background in foreign policy, don't really understand the US's role, or even private contractors like Boeing or Lockheed or anything else that are essentially like working on behalf of the government. People don't know about that. People don't know what the Nakba is. People don't know about, the horrors that went on in the 50s and the 60s. And this has been going on for a very long time. And at this point, it is incredibly unjustified. I could talk about this for hours because it's to the point where when I was in Paris, were the first petitions filed to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. And I believe there's been two rulings separately where it's 35 plus countries on the second one, because it was a big deal that Canada and New Zealand joined that ruling when they made preliminary filings with the ICJ.
Yeah, I remember that now. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So it's a big deal that even the ICJ is like, what the hell are you doing? So it's international law, and international law is tricky. So, but it's the fact that like all of these countries are like, Israel, what the hell are you doing? The ICJ is like, what the hell are you doing? You need to knock this off. Like, this is just so far beyond. And I understand they have the right to defend themselves and stuff like that. Do you mean to tell me that like 27,000 children under the age of 3 are Hamas?
Right.
So let's use some critical thinking skills maybe, but I don't know. Maybe I'm so far on the leftist side and I'm an extremism.
And I think people see this from the Jewish side, and I think you're right in stating people they go back to this historical standard of, okay, well, we had the Holocaust, but right. What people I on this one, I'm like, I support I support a free Israel, but I also support, I look at how this, if you look at history, how this came down. 1948,
Mm-hmm.
when Israel became a state. I mean, Great Britain, it was British Palestine. It was
Mm-hmm.
British Palestine. It was Palestinian people living in this area, British Palestine. And of course, the argument's going to be, well, you can trace this back to, I mean, biblical times, before biblical times, when this was the Jewish land. Well, then you had everything from the Roman Empire to what was called the
Mm-hmm.
Jewish dispersion, where everybody just went out. And so now all of a sudden in 19 and these this that happened over millennia. That happened. And so in 1948, on a decision made by the British, okay, we're going to surrender British Palestine, and I believe
Mm-hmm.
this was at the urging of, it would have been UN in their infancy stage, I believe, kind of the urging saying, okay, we need you to give this land to the Jews, and so now you've just said to the Palestinians, oh, by the way, we're taking your country and people are moving in, and so I think
The
people kind of
U.S. The
miss,
U.S. may be familiar with that just a little bit,
yeah, yeah,
but
well,
I don't
yeah,
know.
but
I
when
don't know. Maybe
when
a little bit.
this is, and for me this is, and I'll be honest with you, this is a difficult issue for me because
Mm-hmm.
I see this as both ways. And tell me what if you agree or disagree with this statement, but I believe Israel's making, their goal is to totally eliminate Hamas. Okay, and to totally eliminate Hamas means going in there and just, whether it's carpet bombing the place and just bombing the crap out of everything. But you think about where the rise of these groups come from. It's from past hurts. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so do you agree? I mean, this is the danger that I see, and tell me what you think about this. You're creating, Israel's not eliminating the problem, they're making it worse by creating a new generation of, I don't want to say terrorists, but basically a new generation, and which would drive people to extremists, because you probably, like you said, you have those people who saw their kids killed right in front of them. You have those kids who saw their parents, disappear. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think I'm accurate in that, or is that going a little bit too far, or what do you think about that?
No, I think you're pretty accurate on that. I think that I think that Israel has really had, if you want to be, really casual about it, has had this quote unquote beef with Palestine for a very long time because they're like, oh, well, like this was deemed our land, in 48. And so they're trying to essentially like clear people out. But I think that now they're using this as an excuse. They're using it as an excuse to, um, to genocide a lot of the people that
Yeah,
they don't like
right.
there. So I think, and I don't think Israel is really going to like listen to the
No.
ICJ, or they've violated already so many conventions and treaties that it's not even funny. But why stop there? They clearly don't care about international law. They don't care about anything else other than pursuing their ultimate goal, which is probably ethnic cleansing. I mean, I'm not
And
going
that's
to
what some
speak on
people,
their
yeah,
side of the things,
right,
but this is what it looks like. And it's to the
right.
point where even Netanyahu is not leaving is not leaving his country and only going to a handful of other countries because he knows that
He
if
knows
he
who he
makes
can,
one wrong move, he can be arrested.
right, right.
So, and it's a
Oh
lot
yeah,
of the European countries. It's why he came to the US. So he's very like fixed in his corner and where he can go because I think he knows, excuse my French, he knows that he's like continuously fucking up.
yes, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's a good point with Israel. Let's move a little bit farther north then with what is going on within the Ukraine and Russia. Trump has already said, he of course in his fashion, he says, this war can end tomorrow. I can end this war tomorrow. Here's where we're at. And you know a lot of things I think have not been really told about why Russia invaded Ukraine. But now the United States, we're pouring. We have been. One thing I did not get the stat as to how many billions of dollars we are now. At last count, I think we were approaching the 10 to 15 billion dollar mark as how much we're funding. One of the largest things that we're funding is is drones now, and of course, this has been, if you want to talk about Biden's burden, this has been 100% on Biden. So, what's your thoughts on how he's handled what's going on in the Ukraine?
So when did that officially happen? I want to say it was
So that would be February the 1st. This is 20. So February the 1st, 2022.
2022. Okay, I think it was my first semester of law school. Because it was in a class that I had who was being taught by a previous diplomat to the Ukraine.
Wow.
So she after that, like, I think it was technically like spring break. I think she spent her spring break traveling around and like talking to people, talking to college boards, talking to people about this, about, this is what's going on, this is what we're seeing. She has friends in like Ukrainian parliament that she's checking in with every day. So she's fantastic. She knows a lot about this, but I'm not nearly as educated on the issue as she is, but I can try. So I think it's interesting that Donald Trump makes this assertion that I can end this tomorrow. I think it's interesting that in his administration, when he was in office, he was snuggling up to Putin, and he's snuggling up to Kim Jong-un, and he's snuggling up to a lot of these questionable, ergo dangerous characters that I'm thinking, are you snuggling up to them because you're kind of scared of them? Like, you want to appease them? So I think that's an interesting thing. And I think it was maybe the presidential debate, well, the only one that we've had this year, the presidential debate where he's touting, like, he's a very good man. Like, I know him. We're good friends. I know him very well, things like that. And that almost goes back to what I said.
Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
No, you're fine. I love it. But that goes back to almost what I was saying with the Israel-Palestine conflict of, why are you choosing to side with the oppressor? Like, I understand that he already has this existing relationship with Putin, but morally, if you don't agree with it, like, you can simply just not be friends anymore. So I don't know if he knows that. But if you want to talk about foreign policy, and people love to talk about gas prices, but without considering the war in Ukraine, which is another, irk that I have that's interesting. But I think I do feel for the Ukrainian people. I have some friends who are of Ukrainian descent, and I feel like that conflict has been significantly overshadowed by Israel and Palestine.
Yes.
And I feel like Israel and Palestine have been Israel, quite frankly, has been getting a much larger chunk of change than Ukraine has been getting from the U.S. But I mean,
last 6 months,
yeah, especially. So I think that's very interesting. So I'm not like a foreign policy I'm not a foreign relations expert in any way, but I think that the Biden administration could absolutely be doing better. I voted for Trump, and I voted for Biden. And yeah, I'm going to have irks with all of them because no one's going to do it completely right.
No.
And I think at the minimum, the bare minimum, before you consider any kind of foreign policy or any kind of funding or international relations, you got to get his name right, dude. Like, I'm so sorry. Holy cow. I feel so bad for like Zelensky because he's in this war-torn country. Like, his people are dying and his home is being torn apart, and he's just over there like, he said, "Well, you just call me the wrong guy? Okay."
Yeah, you can call me Putin, sure, why not?
I know, and I'm just like,
oh, that was one of those moments where, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, so down to the last.
Sorry
question.
if that wasn't.
No,
sorry if that wasn't a direct answer, but
that was perfect. The last question, I told you I told you before we went on the air here that I wanted to surprise you with this last question. Not foreign policy, not domestic policy, but
okay.
This is more your personal opinion. But what do you think? So in the whole shape of this, what you've grown up in, I mean, I've known you since you were in the sixth, seventh grade, something like that.
6, I don't know.
And we go, wow. But we've seen the growth of social media, media in general. What do you think about the role of media in covering the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration? Is it fair? Or are we seeing, what are we seeing? I mean, you as a just common, you can address this from legal standpoint, or you can address this from your own personal viewpoint. What do you think about the role of the media in covering the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration?
Interesting. Well, I mean, social media is everywhere. I think it was you were at least one of the first places that I saw this, but it was like the media bias chart.
Yes.
You know
Yep.
what I'm talking? Yes.
Yes.
The media bias chart.
I use
We
that
still
chart every
see
year.
that.
Yep. I use
I was
that
gonna
chart
say
every
we
year.
see it there. We see it in law school still when we're talking about freedom of the press. So I think it's very, very important to, what we said at the beginning, do your own research, because I have a very hard time trusting Fox News. I have a very hard time trusting CNN. I have a very hard time trusting InfoWars. Like I'm trying
I
to think
don't
of
trust
anything that's
InfoWars at all.
I'm trying to think of like the most like polarized.
MSNBC, yeah. MSNBC,
Yeah.
you're right.
So I mean, everything they say, they have an agenda. Come on. I mean,
Right.
so take it with a grain of salt. The thing that I think is a little bit, I feel icky about it, if that's like the best way to say it. I feel icky about it because Donald Trump, and this has been going on for a while, but it really, really, really amped up during the first presidential debate, is that I think he has so many like fangirls, fanboys that will just listen to absolutely everything he says and treat it as gold. I think that he has this propensity to lie, and to lie to the most extreme lengths, that he knows, even if there is a fact check by whoever media company, whoever wants to claim they're independent or not, or even if it's like the BBC, someone completely removed from the US, his followers aren't going to listen. They don't care. But what I think is so funny is that he's out there like blatantly telling lies, he's out there blatantly telling lies of things that I thought were very common knowledge, but people still want to fight about it, being like, no, he said that, and it's this. And I'm like, have you looked at any data? So I think that's definitely something. And, the fact that he knows that he has that power, and the fact that he knows that he has this massive audience. And maybe it's just a personal opinion, in my heart, I feel like you have some kind of moral responsibility when you have essentially like a microphone that is that loud. Because what does he have, like Truth Social?
Yeah, Truth Social, yeah.
Or what was it, Truth Social, and then there was like Parler, I think.
Parler. I forgot. Man, you mentioned that. I forgot all about Parler. But Parler,
that's like way back there. That's like during COVID.
Yeah, right.
That was way back there. So I think it's interesting that, and this is just completely like my theory, that that Donald Trump, in getting more extreme, is looking for better outlets that they can control the narrative, because in the end, I mean, Fox News is pretty much on their side, but it's not wholly controlled by the RNC. So I think that's when you go to Truth Social, you look at Parler, because it's just more control over the narrative. And I mean, I think anybody who's buying merch for a politician is a little, I'm going to be kind of hesitant of you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're buying a Trump flag or a Biden flag or it doesn't matter.
On a side note, I did see a freshman come in today with the dry fit, dry weave stuff. And on the front was Donald Trump, one pose of Donald Trump, and on the back was another pose of Donald Trump. And I was like, oh my God.
So, you spent real person money on that.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Well, yes, and I mean, on back to school night, they were wearing the hat with the golfer's cap with the Trump hair sticking out the top. It was magic. It was magic.
It's interesting. But yeah, I think you have to be cognizant of who is listening, and quite frankly, like how wrapped around your little orange finger your audience may be. But when you also talk about media, I think you also have to talk about how technology is advancing, and specifically AI. I know the intersection of that within media is going to be, if it's not already a big enough problem, I think it's going to be an even bigger problem. So while Donald Trump is, I don't agree with him. I will not be voting for him. I don't think that he is what this country needs. He's not entirely stupid, because as of right now, where he's on social media and he's claiming that the crowds at the Harris rallies, the crowds at the DNC are all AI, the crowds are, they're not really that big, the RNCs was bigger, things like that. He's claiming it's AI. He's not stupid in the fact that he's already teeing that up, that if the election in November does not go the way he wants, he can try to play the AI card and say, oh, well, how do we know that XY, what was it, Dominion voting machines or something? I don't even know if that's, of course, I was going to say that was a massive lawsuit.
And then Dominion settled out of court with Fox News over defamation and everything else like that.
Yeah, that was a big thing. But regardless, and I don't know how he plans to implement this. If he plans to implement this, I think it is a smart move on his side of things to like kind of plant that AI seed, plant that AI question mark.
Genius, yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was going to say, I'm like, some of his policies are whack, but I'm like, he's not a stupid man. No. He's planning that early for a reason.
Yeah.
And we'll have to just see how that plays out. And of course, all of it's being spread rapidly on media. And, you know, just always check your sources. Please, please don't believe everything you read on Twitter or, God forbid, TikTok. Please get your news somewhere.
If you go to, and all you have to do is do a type up of media bias. And I'm actually looking at the chart right now. And I've told people this too, that I have not watched a news broadcast, per se, watching a news broadcast. I can't tell you the last time I've watched a news broadcast. CBS, NBC, NBC. I'm safely say that 90 to 95% of mine is read. Okay. And I do, and I have there. People don't believe this, but probably one of the most unbiased, and you may have heard of me, you may not. I tell people, News Nation, okay? News Nation is it's a small internet, and they're on my feed. I get stuff from them. AP News, AP kind of leans a little left. They're not super left, because because it is the quote unquote Associated Press. That's what AP stands for. It is basically a conglomeration of local news and foreign news just correspondents who contribute. So, but them, you know, and it's kind of weird. The Wall Street Journal is way right, but the Journal podcast and news, which is on you can go to Spotify and get it, is very centric, which blows my mind. It's the same, but I've heard that often. I'm just like, and I've never listened to this, but I've heard that about, well, Wall Street Journal's way over here, and the Journal, which they call it the Journal pod, or I don't know if it's a podcast or the Journal channel, but it's got little tiny down. It says WSJ right down there in the corner. So, but anyway, Sara, it has been fantastic having you on the show tonight. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time. It has been great touching base with you. And as always, as Sean says, I have to quote Sean: "Be a friend, tell a friend." See us. Go find us on YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, Google We're everywhere. We are everywhere. So until we have next time, Sara, thank you again, and we will see you guys all next week.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of Reason podcast. Check out our previous shows and clips on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok.